Hello, I'm Jim Cathcart. I've been asked to share my personal story about how I got into the field of professional speaking. You look at me today and you say, oh, well, you're a senior speaker. You've been around for many years. This probably came easy for you. Well, let me tell you, it was a little different from that. I was born in the United States in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's in the central southern part of the United States. And my father was a telephone repairman. My mother worked at home and took care of us kids, me and my sister. And my grandfather had had a stroke and was in a hospital bed in the front room of our house, needed constant care, and my mother and my grandfather cared for him. And we didn't have much money. And I went to school with the neighborhood kids, and I expected a very normal, unremarkable life. I thought I would live to be whatever the statistical average was for people of my generation and then die, and that it wouldn't matter much. I thought I'd probably be a nice person and have a decent life. And in 1972, I had been married for 2 years, and we had a new baby, and I was working as a government clerk. I was an assistant to a man who was not busy. Yes, I had a job position, but I had very little to do. And so I was working in a government agency as a clerk, making a small salary. I was 50 pounds overweight. So I was fat. I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day, never exercised. Although I was a fairly nice and happy person, I was not happy on the inside because I hadn't determined what to do with my life yet. And I was sitting there one day at my desk, listening to the radio in the next room and writing on a pad what I thought I wanted to do when I got to be an adult. I already was an adult, but I hadn't grown up yet in my mind. So I was thinking, what do I want to do? And then I heard this deep voice on the radio, a man named Earl Nightingale. Earl Nightingale was an inspirational radio host who had a very short 5-minute program that was on 900 radio stations all around the world. It was called Our Changing World. And that day in 1972, he said, if you will spend 1 hour extra every day studying your chosen field, you will become a national expert in that field in 5 years or less. I thought about that. I said, wait a minute, an hour a day? I'm a government clerk. I've got 8 hours a day. What could I do with the extra hours I have? Well, I could study my chosen field, but I don't have a chosen field. What do I want to do? And I thought about it for weeks on end. And then one day it occurred to me, I want to do what the man on the radio is doing. I want to help people grow and succeed. But I hadn't succeeded. I hadn't improved myself. I didn't have a college degree, didn't have money in the bank, didn't know important people. So what was I going to do? I couldn't get into his field at the top, so I had to get in at the bottom. In other words, I had to start spending an hour a day or more learning about the field of human development. So I got all the classic books, Think and Grow Rich, The Power of Positive Thinking, How to Win Friends and Influence People, all those. I found that Earl Nightingale himself had a series of recordings called Lead the Field. And I acquired those, and I'd listened to them every day for 5 consecutive years. Now think about that for a minute. Little 20-minute recordings, and I was listening to these recordings every single day, many times a day in some cases, for 5 years. My wife and son, they would get in the car and say, are you going to play the recordings again? Yes. I needed to retrain my own thinking. I needed to learn to expect success instead of learning to expect more of the same. I did that, and as I became more and more optimistic, more and more confident, more and more aware, and I read these books and I started writing out my goals, I could see a path for me to become a speaker. Now, at first, I had nothing to say, but that was of value. I was quoting other people instead. That's fine. So what I did was I got other people to teach me how to lead their training programs. And then I went around and conducted training programs for the Junior Chamber of Commerce and for other organizations in the community. And I did that for no pay. In 2 years, I did 400 meetings for no pay. After work and on weekends, I still had my job during the day, but on the weekends and after work, I would go out and I would conduct these meetings. And every time I led one of those meetings, I would become more skilled and more confident and more sure of what I wanted to do. After doing 100 or more meetings, I became very popular in my community for leading meetings like that. And so people would call on me and say, could you come and speak for our company? And I started giving some speeches. And to shorten the story, I ended up becoming a full-time trainer and a consultant. And then as I learned more and I got better at it and I started writing my own materials and writing my own books, I bought an interest in a psychological research firm, did some original study, created a work that became my other book, The Acorn Principle. Today, I have written 18 books that are published throughout the world. I have recorded countless video training programs that are on networks, throughout the world. And I've delivered over 3,000 professional speeches for pay all around the world. Now you say, okay, well, good for you. No, I want you to notice something. I started with nothing going in my favor except desire. I had no training, I had no experience, I had no money, I had no advanced education. I was not a gifted speaker. I had to learn to speak. I had to learn to research and understand my topic. So I did that. Well, I ended up in my own business. Let's see, that was 1972 I heard the radio broadcast. 1974, I'd been listening to these recordings so much for so long and using the ideas that I got a call from a man who sold me those recordings. His name was Harold Gash. And Harold said, Jim, I want you to come to work with me. He said, you've got more potential than any young man I've ever known. Wow, that was quite a compliment. He said, I want you to come to work with me selling Earl Nightingale's recordings. I said, but I'm not good at sales. He said, yes, you are. You just don't realize it yet. So come to work with me. In 1974, I started selling Earl Nightingale's training materials to businesses. And then I left that business, went into business for myself, selling my own materials and my own services. Ended up moving to California from Arkansas and formed a partnership with Dr. Tony Alessandra, who was a college professor that I met there. And we recorded an audio program called Relationship Strategies. And one day I was sitting in my office and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was the voice of Earl Nightingale. And I thought it was a recording, but it was him. He was calling me. He said, may I speak to Jim Cathcart? I said, this is Jim Cathcart. He said, Mr. Cathcart, my name's Earl Nightingale. I said, oh, trust me, sir, I know who you are. He said, well, I just read an article that you wrote, and I think it would make a good audio program. And I said, what's the article? And he told me. And I said, well, that is an audio program. I'll be happy to send it to you. So I did. He listened to it, and he said, if you'll re-record it according to our specifications, I'll publish it. So in 1974, I was selling Earl Nightingale's recordings. In 1984, he was selling my recordings. In the first 2 years that album was released, called Relationship Strategies, they sold $3.5 million US worth of that program. Wow. 72, I was a clerk and I heard him on the radio. 74, I started selling his materials. 10 years later, he was selling my materials around the world. Wow. In 1989, I was the president of the National Speakers Association, which was a group of, at that time, about 3,000 professional speakers and authors. And all of my speaker heroes were in that group. And I had joined the group, and I moved slowly up through the ranks and became national president. And I called Earl Nightingale. I said, Mr. Nightingale, you're my mentor, you're my hero. I would love if you would come to our convention in the summer and sit on stage with me and let me interview you about the evolution of this field of professional paid speaking. He said, I might do that, because it was a non-paid engagement. It was free. He said, yeah, I might do that. I said, okay. So I waited, and I was going to call him back in a few months. And then one day, I got a call from his wife, Diana. And she said, Jim, Earl has died. Oh, I was crushed. I said, I'm so sorry. She said, we're not going to have a funeral in the usual sense, because his remains were cremated and we spread the ashes in a ceremony here at home. She said, but I would like to have a memorial service for him among his fellow speakers at your speaker convention. I said, we would be honored. That would be such a great thing. We'd be happy to do that. And she said, I would like you to speak. And I said, oh, no. You know, that should be giants of industry and world leaders, people who were like Nightingale, a great man, not me. She said, no, Jim, you should present at his memorial service with me, because you are a product of what he was teaching. I said, what do you mean? She said, you followed his teachings and became successful. And that's what the world needs to see, that his message works. At Earl Nightingale's memorial service, in front of hundreds of his fellow professional speakers and his son David Nightingale, who was in the audience that day, the only speakers at that memorial service were his widow Diana and me. What a phenomenal honor and privilege that was for me. I felt so unworthy to be there, but so grateful that I had the opportunity. Now I want you to pause for a moment and reflect on what I just shared with you. I was born in a working class family with no real advantages other than the love of my family. My body parts work, that's a blessing, good, okay. So I had all the equipment to start a successful life, but I didn't have any kind of a head start. I heard the recording on the radio one day and got inspired and spent a great deal of time thinking about what mattered to me and what I wanted to do with my life. And then I followed Earl Nightingale's formula, 1 extra hour every day, studying the field I had chosen, which in this case was human development. A few years later, I was selling his training materials. A few years after that, I was in business for myself. Several years after that, I was in California with my own business and a partnership, and he called me. I didn't call him. He called me because of an article I had written, and he ended up publishing my works to a worldwide audience. And then I had the extreme honor of speaking at his memorial service. Now, if that's possible for me, think of what could be possible for you. Starting where you are with what you know, starting at this point, just take the assets you have. Don't worry about your liabilities. Focus on the assets you have. Choose a path and spend 1 extra hour every day studying that path. In 5 years or less, you'll be a leading expert.